Secrets don't die with their keepers. They lurk in the walls of houses, in the cracks of floorboards, behind false panels, waiting for the moment when the truth will break free. Sometimes it takes years, sometimes it takes decades. In the case of Blackwood Mansion, exactly 10 years. May 13th, 1993 was one of those spring days that are remembered for their serenity. The bright Virginia sunshine, the clear air, and the chirping of birds created an idyllic picture of new life. For Griffin and Veronica Langford, this day was to be the beginning of their own new chapter, as the couple finally began the long-awaited renovation of the Victorian mansion at number 23 Willow Street in the quiet suburb of Winchester. The mansion, built in the late 19th century, had a reputation as one of the most exquisite homes in the area. The Blackwood family had owned it for nearly 50 years, turning it into a venue for charitable receptions and cultural events. Dr. Montgomery Blackwood, a renowned neurosurgeon, and his wife Eleanor, a socialite and philanthropist, were the model couple of Winchester high society until the doctor's death from a stroke in '92 forced the widow to sell the family nest. Veronica and I literally fell in love with this house at first sight, Griffin Langford recalled in his first interview with police after the discovery. The antique architecture, the high ceilings, the spiral staircase, and especially the library. It was the reason we decided to buy, despite the need for major renovations. The library occupied the east wing of the first floor, a spacious room with panoramic windows and massive dark wood bookcases that stretched from floor to ceiling, giving the impression of a classic Victorian study. It was here, amidst the dust and cobwebs, that a chain of events began that turned the perception of the impeccable Blackwood family upside down. On that fateful day, Griffin Langford, a 35-year-old architect, decided to dismantle one of the bookcases that looked particularly dilapidated. Veronica, his wife, was in the process of surveying the attic, planning to turn it into an art studio. What alerted me was that the closet was attached to the wall differently than the others, Langford told Detective Martin Reynolds, who arrived on the scene first. The fasteners looked newer than a turn-of-the-century closet should have, and when I completely detached the structure from the wall, I discovered that the back panel was a different color from the rest of the unit. It had been replaced at a later date. Sliding the massive structure off, Griffin noticed the barely discernible outline of a door in the wall, so skillfully camouflaged that it was almost impossible to see in normal lighting. A thin line of slits framed a rectangle about 2 meters high and just under 1 meter wide. The door had no handle, but yielded when Langford pressed one of the decorative sockets on the panel. It was a moment from one of those movies where the hero accidentally finds the entrance to a secret dungeon, Griffin later admitted. I felt both the thrill of the discoverer and some inexplicable fear at the same time. The space beyond the door turned out to be a small, windowless room with a ventilation system skillfully built into the ceiling slabs. Turning on a simple pocket flashlight, Langford stepped inside and was stunned by what he saw. The room looked like a museum piece, frozen in time. A narrow bed, neatly made up with a coverlet in a floral pattern. A small dressing table with an oval mirror on which stood bottles of perfume and a comb with a few long blonde hairs. A closet, ajar, with women's dresses and blouses visible inside, stylistically in keeping with the early '80s. On the bedside table, a desk lamp and a book laid down on the middle. Everything looked like the owner of the room had gone out for literally 5 minutes and was going to come back in, Griffin recalled. It didn't look like a warehouse of old things or an abandoned room. It seemed like time had stopped here. On a desk against the far wall lay an open, cloth-bound diary. The last entry, in neat female handwriting, was dated December 15th, 1983. Today, I saw what he was doing in the basement. I have to get Tatum out of here. We'll leave tonight. Among the items on the table, Griffin found several photographs showing a young woman with long blonde hair and a girl about 8 years old. On the back of one of the pictures was scrawled in trembling handwriting, "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't escape. Find Montgomery. He's not who he says he is." Veronica Langford, who came down from the attic at her husband's call, immediately insisted on calling the police. Unlike her husband, who was fascinated by the house's history and architectural features, she worked as a social worker for Child Protective Services and had a keen sense for situations involving possible abuse. "This room is not just an architectural quirk or a repository for old things," she told Officer Reynolds when first interviewed. "The door was purposely disguised. A bookcase covered it in such a way as to hide it from view. And this note? It can't be a coincidence." When Winchester police arrived on the scene, investigators immediately cordoned off the area and began a photo lineup. Detective Martin Reynolds, who had worked in homicide for 23 years, noted in his first report, "The room was set up in such a way that a person could stay in it for long periods of time without having to leave. A ventilation system, a hidden manhole to the sanitary room, folding shelves of canned goods. This is not a spontaneous construction, but a carefully planned space." By the evening of May 13th, 1993, a special investigative team arrived at the Langford home. The police department's archival records were pulled up, and soon detectives already knew the name of the person whose belongings were believed to be in the secret room. Abigail Mercer, a 23-year-old teacher training student who had worked as a nanny for the Blackwood family and had gone missing in December of '83. For 10 years, this room remained untouched, hidden behind a false wall and a massive bookcase. Winchester Police Chief Robert Parker commented on the case at the first press conference. "For 10 years, the Blackwood family kept this secret, selling the house with the evidence literally buried in it. It is now our job to find out what happened to Ms. Mercer and what role the former owners of the mansion played in her disappearance." The Langfords had no idea that their renovation work would lead to the reopening of one of the most mysterious missing persons cases in the county's history. But it was their chance that became the key to the chain of events that unraveled the dark history of the respectable Blackwood family and their mansion at 23 Willow Street. Abigail Mercer disappeared from the Blackwood family's life as quickly as she entered it. Only 3 months separated the day she first set foot in the stately Willow Street mansion from the moment her name appeared in the police missing persons reports. 3 months that changed the fates of everyone involved. According to Shenandoah University records, Abigail Catherine Mercer entered the Faculty of Education in September of 1981. Her academic record spoke of a motivated student with a high grade point average and an active member of the campus community. Nannying was to be not only a source of income for her, but also practical experience for her future career as a teacher. In an archived interview transcript from December 18, 1983, Janet Wilson, Abigail's roommate in the student dormitory, reported, "Abby always said she wanted to work with children. She chose her part-time jobs very carefully and was thrilled when she was accepted into the Blackwood family. She said it was a great opportunity to work with well-off, educated people who could be useful connections in the future." The Blackwood family held a privileged position in Winchester's social hierarchy. Dr. Montgomery Blackwood, a 50-year-old neurosurgeon, headed an experimental department at Virginia Regional Medical Center. According to testimony from colleagues, he specialized in advanced treatments for neurodegenerative diseases and held several patents on medical devices. His wife, 47-year-old Eleanor, came from a wealthy Boston family and was active in philanthropy, heading the New Horizons Orphans Foundation. Their only daughter, 8-year-old Tatum, attended the prestigious St. Catherine's private school. At first glance, the Blackwoods embodied the ideal of the American upper-middle-class family: successful, prosperous, socially active. However, as the subsequent investigation showed, behind the impeccable facade lurked disturbing shadows. Abigail was hired after the previous nanny, Helen Johnson, abruptly resigned after working in the Blackwood home for only 6 months. According to the official version, she decided to return to her parents' home in Ohio, but police were never able to find any trace of her at the address. In the same interrogation report, Janet Wilson noted, "I was immediately alarmed that the doctor offered Abby such a high payment. $1,200 a month for a part-time job in the year '83 was a lot of money for a part-time student." Abby's explanation was that the girl, Tatum, required special attention because of some emotional problems, but still, the amount seemed unusually generous. According to police reports, on the morning of December 16, 1983, Eleanor Blackwood called the Winchester Police Station at 9:35 to report the disappearance of her nanny. In the statement, she indicated that Abigail had not shown up for breakfast at 8:30 as usual, and her room on the 3rd floor of the mansion was empty. Mrs. Blackwood appeared concerned but not panicked. Officer Patrick Donahue, the first officer to arrive on the scene, noted in his initial report. She suggested that Miss Mercer may have left voluntarily because she noticed some of the girl's personal belongings were missing. An inspection of Abigail's room later that day did indeed reveal the absence of some of her clothes, cosmetics, and a travel bag that, according to her dorm roommate, the girl had brought with her when she moved in with the Blackwoods. However, in the room remained valuable things: a silver locket, a gift from her parents on adulthood, a few dozen dollars in cash in a desk drawer, and a camera, Nikon. Detective Thaddeus Warner, a 55-year veteran of the Winchester Police Department, took over the case. His first step was to interview Dr. Blackwood, who was at home at the time of the alleged disappearance. "I went to bed about midnight," quoted the doctor's interview transcript. "Before doing so, I looked in on my daughter, who was already asleep. Miss Mercer I last saw about 10 o'clock at night in the library where she was reading a book. We briefly discussed the next day's schedule, and I handed her an envelope containing a bonus for the upcoming holidays, $600 in cash. She seemed perfectly normal, maybe a little tired. An envelope found in a dresser drawer in Abigail's room revealed only $150. The rest of the sum was presumably taken by the girl with her, which strengthened the theory of a voluntary departure. The minor Tatum, interviewed in the presence of a school counselor, reported that Abigail had been sad and whispering a lot on the phone the evening before her disappearance. However, phone records requested from the phone company did not record any outgoing calls from the Blackwood home that evening, other than a brief conversation between the doctor and a colleague at the hospital. Tatum did not give the impression of a traumatized child, the school psychologist noted in her report, but she showed an atypically weak emotional reaction to the disappearance of a person to whom her parents said she was strongly attached. The search for Abigail followed standard missing persons protocol. Staff at train stations, bus stations, and airports were interviewed. None of them could recall a girl matching the description. Her parents, who lived in Roanoke, 100 miles from Winchester, flatly denied that their daughter had contacted them or appeared at home. Abigail's former classmates and friends have also not heard from her since her disappearance. Her bank account remained untouched. Social Security in her name was not used for employment. It's as if she vanished into thin air, leaving no trace. Detective Warner, however, continued his persistent search. According to the testimony of his widow, interviewed during the reopened investigation in '93, he was obsessed with the case and considered the version of voluntary departure untenable. Thaddeus said something didn't add up in the Blackwood's testimony, Marilyn Warner recalled. He mentioned odd details. No trace of Abigail at the bus station where she supposedly boarded an early bus. Scraps of papers found in the garden that looked like pages from a diary. Contradictory testimony from neighbors about the sounds of a car that night. He was sure the girl could not have left on her own. On January 27, 1984, 6 weeks into the investigation, Detective Warner died suddenly of a heart attack. His successor, Detective Gordon Pierce, after a brief review of the case files, classified the case as a voluntary withdrawal and effectively ended the active investigation. We are dealing with a classic case of an impulsive decision typical of young people her age, Pierce pointed out in the final report. Financial resources, lack of personal necessities, and no signs of struggle or coercion indicate that Ms. Mercer made the decision to leave voluntarily, perhaps to start a new life elsewhere. Abigail's parents, Robert and Margaret Mercer, disagreed with the police findings and continued a private search for their daughter for several years, but to no avail. By the early 90s, they had moved to Florida, coming to terms with their loss. Until the discovery of the secret room in the Blackwood mansion, the Abigail Mercer case remained one of many unsolved disappearance stories buried in the archives of the Winchester Police Department. But sometimes the truth, no matter how deeply hidden, finds a way to come to light. If you enjoyed this investigation, be sure to like and comment below the video. It's through your activity that YouTube's algorithms will promote our content and more people will be able to discover this shocking story. And of course, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next chapters of this exciting criminal investigation. The truth never remains buried forever. It just waits for its time to rise to the surface, like the decaying remains that are sooner or later pushed to the shore by the river of time. On May 14, 1993, less than 24 hours after the secret room was discovered, a special investigative team from the Winchester District Attorney's Office, headed by Detective Laurel Sinclair, began its work at the Blackwood mansion. The morning was overcast. The gray clouds hanging over the town made the mansion look even darker. The police tapes stretched around the perimeter of the property fluttered in the wind. The house that had once hosted the social gatherings of Winchester's high society was now occupied by forensic officers in white hazmat suits. When I first walked into that room, I got goosebumps, Detective Sinclair later recalled. I've been in law enforcement for 22 years, but I've never encountered anything like this. The room looked like someone had created a museum of one person, Abigail Mercer. All of her belongings were neatly arranged like exhibits. 37-year-old Laurel Sinclair, with a reputation as one of the best missing persons investigators, immediately began a detailed examination of Abigail's diary, found in the hidden room. The entries covered the period from September through the 15th of December, 1983. The first few months contained the usual notes of a young girl, impressions of a new job, concerns for Tatum's ward, descriptions of home and family. Beginning in November, however, the tone of the notes changed dramatically. Marcus Elliott, an expert graphologist involved in the investigation, noted in his report, "The handwriting becomes more nervous, angular. The pressure of the pen on the paper increases, indicating the growing tension of the author. The entries become shorter, but more emotionally intense. On November 21st, Abigail recorded, "Heard strange noises from the basement again today. Dr. B went down there at 3 in the morning, said he was checking the heating system, but his hands had some dark stains on them. He thinks I didn't notice." December 2nd entry. Tatum drew a weird drawing. Drawn herself, me and some other girls inside the walls of the house. Said, "Daddy's making medicine out of them." Mrs. B saw the drawing and immediately tore it up and had a long talk with T alone. The girl came back crying. What is going on here? December 9. Tried to call Janet, but the phone doesn't work. The doctor said the line was damaged by a storm, but there was no storm. I'm getting scared. Yesterday I found my comb in his office, among some medical instruments. What does he want my hair for? The last entry, dated December 15th, was clearly made in haste. Today I saw what he was doing in the basement. I have to get Tatum out of here. We'll leave tonight. In parallel with the study of the diary, technicians examined a tape found in the room. The yellowed label read Tatum, age 5. The tape had been recorded on a household tape recorder, apparently in secret. The sound quality left much to be desired, but the voices were clear enough. The tape showed Abigail talking to little Tatum. The conversation took place, judging from the content, about 2 weeks before the babysitter disappeared. "Abby, why doesn't Daddy like it when we go into the basement?" a childish voice asked. "It's probably his work office down there, honey. Adults need privacy sometimes," replied presumably Abigail. "No, it's not an office in there. There's a lab in there. I saw it when Daddy forgot to close the door. There's lots and lots of tubes and bottles of different colored liquids, and there are other nannies sleeping in there too." "What other nannies, honey?" "The ones before you. Daddy said they got very tired and now they're resting in special capsules. He says they are helping science. Are you going to help science too, Abby?" That was the end of the tape. The audio expert confirmed its authenticity and dated it to the beginning of December 1983. The phrase about other nannies attracted special attention of the investigators. The original case file mentioned only one predecessor of Abigail, Helen Johnson. Detective Sinclair sent inquiries to the police and Winchester City Council archives to see if there were any other cases of missing young women associated with the Blackwood home. The results of the archival search exceeded the darkest expectations. On May 23, 993, a police report dated August 972 was found. Missing 21-year-old Octavia Caldwell, who had worked as a nanny for the Blackwood family. In a strange coincidence, she was also reported to have run away voluntarily after a note was found in her room saying, "Don't look for me. I've gone west to start a new life." There was no handwriting examination of the note which survived in the archives. When we matched the dates, we realized we were dealing with a serial case, Sinclair noted at the press conference. Over a 20-year period, at least 3 young women who worked at the Blackwood home had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. After obtaining a warrant for a full search of the mansion's basement, the investigative team discovered a room that had clearly served as a laboratory. The walls were tiled. There were drainage drains in the floor, and there were fixtures for medical equipment on the ceiling. All the equipment had been dismantled, but traces of chemicals remained. Analysis revealed the presence of formaldehyde, ethanol, and phenol, substances used to preserve biological samples. Forensic scientist Raymond Collins reported in his report. The concentrations of these substances in the wastewater flushes far exceeded the acceptable limits for a home laboratory. A particularly disturbing discovery was a hidden door in the north wall of the basement, leading to a narrow corridor between the exterior and interior walls of the house. The corridor, according to building experts, was constructed during a major renovation undertaken by the Blackwoods in 1977, shortly after they purchased the house. The original plan for the mansion did not contain this architectural element, signifying a deliberate remodeling. The house literally hid a network of secret passageways inside, explained architect Jeremy Hogarth, who was brought in to investigate. Cavities were created between the walls in various parts of the house that were large enough to accommodate, well, let's say, large objects. On May 26, 1993, investigators contacted Tatum Blackwood, who was by then 18 years old. After her father died and her mother sold the house, she had moved to Boston, where she was studying architecture at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Upon receiving word of the reopening of the investigation, Tatum immediately returned to Winchester. Ms. Blackwood appeared extremely tense but controlled her emotions. Amanda Reese, a psychologist who attended the initial interview, noted in her report. She claimed to have little recollection of the events of December '83, which is not surprising given her young age at the time. At Detective Sinclair Tatum's urging, Tatum agreed to undergo a regressive hypnotherapy session under the direction of Dr. Nathaniel Stern, a specialist in recovering repressed memories. The session was conducted in the presence of Tatum's attorney and was fully recorded. The first 40 minutes of the session were inconclusive. Tatum could not recall anything specific about the night of December 15th. However, when Dr. Stern directed her memories to the basement of the house, there was an unexpected breakthrough. "I hear screaming," Tatum said in an altered, almost childlike voice. "Abby is screaming. Daddy's dragging her downstairs. Mommy's telling me to go to bed. The basement is cold and smells like a hospital. Abby is on the table. She doesn't move. Dad says she'll help science like the others." He opens the wall. The wall moves. Behind the wall are shelves. On the shelves are glass cases. In the boxes are them. They look at me through the glass. Their eyes are open. They look, but they don't see. At this point, Tatum began to choke and became hysterical, repeating the same phrase. The wall. In the wall. He was hiding them in the walls. The session had to be immediately cut short, and Tatum was hospitalized with an acute panic attack. The audio recording of the hypnotherapy session was the key piece of evidence that led to a warrant to open the walls of the Blackwood mansion. 24 hours after the session, a special construction crew, in the presence of the investigation team, began dismantling the wall between the basement and the first floor of the north wing of the mansion. Fletcher, a 39-year veteran journalist with a background in crime reporting, became interested in the Abigail Mercer case after Detective Sinclair's press conference. In the archives of the newspaper where he'd worked for nearly 20 years, he'd found old notes about the Blackwood mansion, including a short article about the gardener's death from the 90s. What alerted me to the coincidence was that Rutherford Hayes, who had worked for the Blackwoods for over 30 years, had retired just after Abigail disappeared. The obituary mentioned that he passed away at the Quiet Harbor nursing home in Shepherdstown. I phoned there and was shocked to learn that the news of his death was premature, Fletcher later recounted in an interview. Quiet Harbor is a 3-story red brick Victorian building located on the outskirts of Shepherdstown, 30 miles from Winchester. The once luxurious mansion, turned into a nursing home for the elderly, looked dismal. The peeling paint on the window frames, the weedy garden, and the dusty windows made for a depressing atmosphere. Inside, it smelled of medicine, old age, and cheap disinfectant. Rutherford Hayes, an 87-year-old African-American man, found himself in a small room on the second floor. A haggard old man with skin resembling cracked tree bark sat at a window looking out over an abandoned garden. According to his medical records, Hayes suffered from progressive dementia and was in a world of his own most of the time, only occasionally returning to clear consciousness. When I called the Blackwoods' name, something amazing happened, Fletcher testified. The old man's gaze became clearer, as if the veil had fallen from his eyes. His hands, which until then had been resting on the armrests of the chair, suddenly clenched into fists. "The devil doctor," he whispered. Convinced that Hayes' reaction was no accident, Fletcher immediately contacted Detective Sinclair. Within 3 hours, an investigative team was already at Quiet Harbor, and the conversation with Hayes was being videotaped in the presence of a medical examiner and an attorney assigned to protect the elderly man's interests. "I worked for the Blackwoods from 64 to 84, Hayes said in an unexpectedly firm voice. "Tended the garden, maintained the house. The doctor paid well, but he was strict. Never let me go down into the cellar. Never. And the missus always made sure I left before dark." The most valuable testimony concerned the night of December 15th, 83. Hayes, contrary to custom, was lingering in the garden house, repairing a broken lawnmower. About midnight, he noticed unusual movement at the seldom-used exterior entrance to the basement. The doctor was carrying something wrapped in a sheet, big as a man. He didn't see me, and I hid behind the rhododendron bushes. He opened the cellar door and went down there. 15 minutes later, he came out empty-handed. There were dark stains on the sheet. The next morning, Miss Abigail was reported missing. Even more shocking was Hayes's testimony that earlier in the 70s, he had helped Dr. Blackwood install special equipment in the basement. Glass containers with systems of tubes and pumps. He said it was for his science experiments, to store samples. I didn't ask questions because I was afraid of losing my job, but one day, when the doctor was away at a conference, I happened to see the missus go down to the basement and stand in front of one of those cabinets for a long time with her hand on the glass. There was something inside that looked like a human face, but I can't be sure. I left at once. After receiving Hayes's testimony, Detective Sinclair dispatched experts to re-examine the basement of the Blackwood mansion again, more thoroughly. The decision was made to remove a portion of the walls where, according to architectural expertise, there might be hidden rooms. On June 5, 1993, when the builders opened the north wall of the basement, they found a niche filled with mortar of later origin than the main masonry. When the mortar was removed, the niche contained remains of organic tissue identified as human. Forensic examination of samples taken from the basement drains and the discovered niche yielded a sensational result. DNA analysis, a technology just beginning to be used in forensic science in the early 90s, showed a match between the genetic material and the samples provided by Abigail Mercer's parents. "We have irrefutable evidence that Abigail Mercer did not leave the Blackwood home voluntarily, but was murdered in the basement of the home," Detective Sinclair said at a June 7th press conference. Based on the new evidence, the district attorney authorized the exhumation of the body of Montgomery Blackwood, who was buried in Green Hills Cemetery in Winchester in October 1992. Toxicological analysis of the deceased's tissues revealed abnormally high levels of experimental drugs of neurochemical action, including compounds not officially registered. Judging by the substances found in Dr. Blackwood's body, he had been taking drugs affecting higher nervous activity for a long time, explained forensic scientist Howard Morrison. Such concentration could cause periods of manic excitement, paranoia, and violation of moral restraints. In parallel with the exhumation, Tatum Blackwood, having recovered from her first seizure, agreed to a second hypnotherapy session. This time, the doctors took additional measures to control her emotional state. During the second session, Tatum recalled more details about her childhood in the Willow Street house. "My dad gave me medicine every night," she said under hypnosis. "Little red pills. He said they were vitamins to make me sleep well and not have bad dreams. After taking them, I couldn't remember what happened during the night, even if I woke up. One day I forgot to take a pill and saw her and my mom carrying Abby. She was like a doll, not moving. Her arms were hanging down and her eyes were open. The next morning my mom said Abby was gone and I made it all up. But I knew I had seen the truth." The next step was to get a statement from Eleanor Blackwood. Detectives discovered that after selling the mansion, she had moved to Phoenix, Arizona, where she lived in a gated retirement community for wealthy retirees called Golden Dunes. Despite an official request, the 60-year-old widow adamantly refused to meet with Virginia law enforcement officials. Through her attorney, Michael Drayton, she relayed a brief statement. Montgomery was a genius ahead of his time. Everything he did was for science and humanity. I will not participate in a campaign to denigrate the memory of an outstanding doctor and scientist based on the testimony of an old man with dementia and a traumatized girl. If the police have any questions for me, let them contact me through my lawyer." Since Eleanor was not formally charged, it was not possible to compel her to testify. However, the investigation continued, and an important source of information came from Jasper Rhodes, Montgomery's former colleague at the Virginia Medical Center. The 63-year-old Rhodes, now retired, agreed to be interviewed by Detective Sinclair at his Richmond home. The spacious living room, stocked with bookcases and overlooking a manicured garden, was in stark contrast to the environment in which Rutherford Hayes lived. Rhodes, a neat, gray-haired man in a tweed jacket, spoke measuredly, choosing his words carefully. "Montgomery has always been obsessed with the idea of preserving human consciousness after the body dies," he told me. His official research concerned the treatment of degenerative brain diseases, but privately, he developed techniques for preserving nervous tissue in an active state. He was convinced that with the help of special chemical compositions, it was possible to preserve neural connections and, theoretically, preserve personality. According to Rhodes, about 1,970 Blackwood presented a paper to the scientific community on the possibility of maintaining brain cell activity after clinical death, but received a strongly negative reaction because of ethical problems. He then continued his research privately, setting up a laboratory in the basement of his home. "He used to say he needed fresh tissue samples, but I never asked where he got them from. We all assumed he was using lab animals. Now, hearing about what went on in his house, I am horrified at the thought that I could have indirectly contributed to it without asking questions." Rhodes's testimony was the final piece in a mosaic that confirmed a terrible truth. The esteemed Dr. Montgomery Blackwood used the young women who worked in his home for his experiments in preserving human consciousness after death, and Abigail Mercer was apparently one of his victims. No crime is so perfect that it leaves no trace. Even walled secrets, sooner or later, find their way to the light. On June 10, 1993, a team of specialists began a full-scale survey of the Blackwood mansion using the latest technology, including thermographic cameras and ultrasonic void detectors. What they discovered surpassed the investigation's darkest fears. It was a chilly morning, despite the summer season. Low clouds hung over Winchester, and a light rain had turned the mansion's once manicured garden into a muddy mess. Technicians in hazmat suits moved methodically around the house with equipment that looked like weapons from sci-fi movies. Thermal scanners registered the slightest temperature deviations that could indicate hidden cavities in the walls. Already 2 hours after the survey began, we detected the first anomaly. Eric Goodman, the technical team leader, recounted. In the east wall of the basement, the scanners showed an extended void measuring about 2 by 3 meters, not marked on any of the building plans. By mid-afternoon, 5 more hidden cavities had been identified. 3 in the basement and 2 on the first floor, carefully camouflaged behind false partitions. With the DA's authorization, the crew proceeded to dismantle the walls. The first autopsy, performed in the east wing of the basement, revealed a hidden room set up as a laboratory. Although the main equipment had been removed, there were still fixtures for instruments on the walls and drainage holes in the floor. It was a real operating theater, forensic scientist Simon Ashley noted in the report. Tiles on the walls, drains in the floor, a highly filtered ventilation system. Everything is designed to carry out serious medical procedures in complete secrecy. The second and third cavities found in the north and west walls of the basement contained something that shocked even seasoned detectives. Behind thick brick partitions were glass containers, about 2 meters high, filled with preserving liquid. 2 of them contained human remains, badly degraded but still recognizable. Preliminary DNA analysis from the first container showed a high probability of the remains belonging to Abigail Mercer, Detective Sinclair reported in a closed briefing for law enforcement officials. The second sample has a high probability of belonging to Octavia Caldwell, who disappeared in '72. The third container was empty, but retained traces of biological material. Experts speculated that it was intended for the next victim, or contained remains removed before the house was sold. The remaining 2 cavities, found on the first floor behind the walls of the library and doctor's office, contained medical equipment, systems of tubes, pumps, monitors, and chemical containers connected to containers in the basement. Essentially, the entire house was turned into a single system for experimentation, explained Dr. Norton Galbraith, an FBI serial crime consultant involved in the investigation. Blackwood modified the architecture of the mansion to create a network of hidden laboratories connected by communications. On June 11th, investigators discovered Dr. Blackwood's personal safe, cleverly disguised under the floorboards of his office. Inside were documents that shed light on the true nature of his activities. Detailed records of experiments on preserving neural activity after the termination of physical functions, as he called it. Blackwood's journals are striking in their methodicality and complete lack of emotion, noted psychiatrist Jeffrey Walsh, who analyzed the materials. He describes the murders and the subsequent manipulation of the bodies as standard scientific procedures, without the slightest sign of empathy for the victims. A classic case of psychopathy disguised as scientific enthusiasm. The records detailed the technique of specimen preparation. Young women were sedated with drugs injected into their food, then subjected to a procedure Blackwood called preservation of neural structure. The method involved the intravenous administration of preserving solutions while preserving brain activity, which he believed allowed for the fixation of consciousness at the moment of transition from life to death. A special section of the notes was devoted to memory experiments on his daughter, Tatum. From the age of 4, the girl received regular doses of neuropsychotropic drugs developed by her father that blocked the formation of long-term memories of traumatic events. In fact, Dr. Blackwood was using his own child as a test subject in controlled amnesia research. On June 12th, copies of the materials from the safe were given to Tatum Blackwood at her insistence. Her lawyer warned of the risk of psychological trauma, but the 28-year-old woman insisted on her right to know the truth about her father's activities. That same night, she was found unconscious in a room at the Wyndham Hotel in downtown Winchester, where she was staying for the duration of the investigation. An overdose of sleeping pills, emergency room physician Richard Donovan stated. She had taken nearly 30 pills, drinking them with whiskey. The only thing that saved her was that the maid came in early. In a suicide note found at the headboard of her bed, Tatum wrote, "I now realize what he was doing. He was using them for experiments. He said it was for the advancement of medicine. I can't live with the thought that I was part of this, that I ate at the same table with a monster, that I loved him." After emergency hospitalization and psychiatric evaluation, Tatum Blackwood was diagnosed with severe PTSD and dissociative amnesia. Doctors stated that years of taking drugs in childhood irreversibly damaged the mechanisms of memory formation, creating a fragmented picture of reality, which the brain could not integrate. On June 15th, the investigative team received tragic news from Arizona. Eleanor Blackwood had been found dead in her apartment at the Golden Dunes boarding house, 2 days after a visit from police officers relaying a request from Virginia investigators. The preliminary report pointed to an overdose of sleeping pills. On the bedside table, we found an empty Seconal vial and an unfinished martini glass, Phoenix detective Michael Rodriguez reported. An envelope labeled, "To my daughter," was lying nearby. The contents of the envelope were given to Ms. Tatum Blackwood through her attorney. The contents of Eleanor's suicide letter have not been disclosed to the public, but according to sources close to the investigation, the woman admitted to knowing about her husband's activities, but turning a blind eye, out of fear and a perverse admiration for his genius. On June 20, the Langfords formally relinquished ownership of the mansion, declaring it impossible to live in a house soaked in misery. The Winchester City Council decided to demolish the building after all investigative measures had been completed, citing structural integrity compromised by numerous alterations and the potential danger of chemicals that had soaked into the walls. During the final phase of the investigation, forensic investigators discovered another entry from Abigail Mercer's diary behind the lining of a suitcase in a secret room, dated December 14th, 1983, the day before she disappeared. "I'm afraid he's putting something in my tea. And Tatum's tea, too. I found his research notes. He's been conducting illegal human experiments for years. The previous nannies didn't leave. They became his test subjects. I have to get out of here. I have to save Tatum before we end up like the others." The Blackwood house at 23 Willow Street was demolished on October 9th, 1993. In its place now stands a small memorial park, dedicated to the memory of the victims of Dr. Montgomery Blackwood. But locals still avoid the place, especially after dark. They say they sometimes hear sounds like screams, muffled by the walls, as if the earth itself holds the memory of what happened inside the walls of the cursed house. If you enjoyed our investigation,
Give us a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us tell stories that should never be forgotten. In the next issue, we will tell you about the equally shocking case, Sanatorium for the Chosen. Patients nobody visited.